Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 460 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today is another in the Defining Diabetes series. It's short, it's sweet, and it's informative. I've been defining diabetes here on the Juicebox Podcast forever, it feels like. And I've done simple terms like pre-bolus, A1C, basal, and bolus. We also have talked about honeymooning and things that people don't like to talk about. We've defined non-compliant, brittle diabetes, and even talked about terms that are specific to the podcast, like stopping the arrows, trust will happen, feeding insulin, bumping and nudging. These episodes are chock full of good information. They're short and digestible. And if that wasn't enough, they're made even better with the presence of Jenny Smith, my friend and certified diabetes educator who helps me on these and the pro tip episodes. So today, Jenny and I are going to define MODY Diabetes, M-O-D-Y. While you're listening to that definition with Jenny and I, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you enjoyed this episode, look for the other Defining Diabetes episodes right there in your podcast player. You can just search Juicebox Podcast, Defining Diabetes, and you will get a super long list of them. You can also find them at juiceboxpodcast.com and diabetesprotip.com. Speaking of websites, if you go to integrateddiabetes.com, you'll be at the place where Jennifer Smith works. There you'll learn things like Jennifer Smith has had type 1 diabetes since she was a child. Did you know that? It's true. Over 30 years, Jenny's had type 1. She holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring systems. She also cheats at Scrabble. That's not true. I just never say anything bad about Jenny, and I thought that would be funny. But even as I said it, it felt wrong. Not going to have a bunch of ads today. Just want to remind you to go to the T1D Exchange. Fill out their survey. Help other people with type 1 diabetes. It is free for you, of course, because you're the one doing the thing. It is 100% HIPAA compliant. It is 1,000% anonymous. And if you want to remove your answers at any time, you can. So an easy thing to do. Why would you do this? Because the decisions that are made with your answers help people living with type 1 diabetes. All you need to be is a type 1 who's living in America or the caregiver of a type 1 who lives in the United States, and you can go do this right now. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. Everyone who completes the survey is benefiting people living with type 1 diabetes, and you're benefiting the show a little bit too. So thank you for that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is MODY. So I can only read
you thought LADA was interesting.
Yeah, this is even worse, right? I mean, more like, so maturity onset diabetes of the young.
Mm-hmm.
Why did that? What? See now, Jenny, right off the bat, it says mature and young at the same time. These words don't go together. What does this mean?
No, and I've thought that myself.
Okay.
I don't love MODY title or what it stands for, because you're right. Mature and young. How do those go together? Really, the diagnostic typical age, this is where it comes from, is somewhere between about like 10, like pre-puberty.
Okay.
All the way through like the mid 40s. So you're like kind of second decade through the fourth, fifth-ish decade of life is the typical diagnostic time period for MODY.
Okay.
I've worked with only 2 people with MODY. Both of them I've worked with through pregnancy.
Okay.
And it's been really interesting. I mean, one who has had MODY, she was diagnosed very early as a child with MODY, had really good, like, I guess, like tracking care in terms of like, you know, how to manage. But it's interesting because It's very rare. This is where MODY is more similar to like that type 2, in that there's not an autoimmune component to it. So if you're checking antibodies, somebody with MODY may look the type 1 bill, but they won't have antibodies like type 2.
So this is just from Harvard Health, but it says maturity onset diabetes of the young, MODY, is an inherited form of diabetes mellitus. It is caused by a change in one of 11 genes. Up to 5% of all diabetes cases may be due to MODY. Just like other people with diabetes, people with MODY have trouble regulating their blood sugar levels. So and
this is another, I don't know if this is in your facts, but I remember reading not long ago that I believe it's adults who are diagnosed with type 1. Almost, I think it's 80% of them have actual like MODY. I would have to relook for that fact, but I'm sure it struck me. I was like, really? Does that mean that a lot of people like walking around with like adult, like, it was a really interesting fact. I'll have to look for it again if I can find it.
It says here that it's a monogenic disease, meaning that it's caused by a single gene mutation. So you actually have a gene changes. One of 11 genes changes. It could be any number, any one of those 11. And now suddenly I have all the same symptoms of somebody with type 1 diabetes. That's kind of up. We'll just bleep that out later. But I mean, there shouldn't be multiple ways to end up with
no.
You should just be one way. How is it diagnosed? Blood sugar test. So it's the same thing, really. So there could be tons of people who have this who don't know it because it looks exactly like type 1 that would come autoimmune.
It does. Oftentimes, though, and this is where proper diagnosis is really important, because the different types of medication management for MODY differ depending on that genetic mutation, like the reason for their MODY.
Really?
Some of them do very, very well if diagnosed correctly, more so on oral medications and lifestyle change, much similar to a type 2.
Oh.
And then there are some that do much better with other, like insulin may be needed, more similar to a type 1, but they don't have that antibody component that would designate them truly as type 1.
No kidding. Well, that's weird.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing is the C-peptides, which sort of are a measure of your own pancreatic beta cell action and like pop out of insulin, right? In someone with MODY, as well as with type 2, they have normal range of beta cell action. They have normal range of C-peptide levels. Whereas in somebody with type 1, their C-peptide levels are below a normal level or almost undetectable. So
I feel like if you tell me that we have described MODY completely, that we're going to take a little minute here and do this again with C-peptide. Can you do that?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Do you think we did MODY okay?
I think so. I mean, from the general of what we can give to people, there are very few, I guess, good place. I know that I think it's the University of Chicago that actually has a MODY tracking system, so that you can actually they log patients who have diagnosed MODY, which is interesting. But yeah, I think in definition, I think we did a good job.
Well, and it looked. Thank you. And it looks like something, I just thanked you like I said anything, except the only thing I had, listen, so everybody listening knows, the only thing I added to this was I said to Jenny, I think we should define MODY in one of the episodes. Other than that, I've had nothing to do with this. But I did just Google MODY testing, and Quest Diagnostics is a laboratory that I think is all over America. And it's funny how they're starting to pop up because they describe all the testing they do. So there is a test for it. So a doctor can do a blood draw that would tell you. And they have a couple little pieces of information. It says MODY 2% of all diabetes cases. So they think there's 500,000 people with MODY. And 90% of MODY's cases are misdiagnosed type 1 or type 2. Well, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, okay.
It was something.
Right. All right, cool. Huge thanks to Jenny for lending her brilliance to the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget to check her out at integrateddiabetes.com. You can actually hire Jenny and she'll help you with your diabetes. Thanks also to all the sponsors that I didn't mention today. And what else? Check out the T1D Exchange at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Take the survey, fill it out, help people with type 1 diabetes, help the show, feel good about yourself. Takes a few minutes to do something nice. If you hold on for a second after the music, I'll go over where the Diabetes Pro Tip episodes are, the Defining Diabetes episodes, how you can listen in a podcast player if you're listening online, and all the other stuff that new listeners and interested parties should know. So here's how it goes. If you want to check out the Omnipod, the Dexcom, Gvoke Hypo Pen, T1D Exchange, Touched by Type 1, with a Contour Next One blood glucose meter, I'd appreciate it if you'd use my links. They're right there in the podcast player show notes. You can also find them at juiceboxpodcast.com, where you can type them into a browser. And at the very end of this, I'll leave them if you want to hear them. But I imagine you're going to shut it off before I say that. But still, I'll put them there for you. Now, the Diabetes Pro Tip episodes, for those of you who listen in a podcast player, they're right there. You can just search Diabetes Pro Tip and the words Juicebox Podcast, and you're going to get them all. But you can also find them at diabetesprotip.com. When you get there, you're going to see that the Pro Tip episodes begin at episode 210 with an episode called Diabetes Pro Tip, Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. And then they go on for there. Pro Tips began back in February of 2019, and there was a new one put up as recently as March 5th, 2021. So it's a really great list of episodes that will help you manage your diabetes the way you hear us talking about it here. And these Defining Diabetes episodes are also incredibly helpful. Right now, the way diabetesprotip.com is set up, if you scroll down a little bit, you can find those as well. There's also Ask Scott and Jenny shows, the latest episodes of the podcast. It's all right there. Actually, there's also links to places where you can listen through an app. So I know some people don't listen to a lot of podcasts, and this could be new for them. But you can listen in a free application. If you're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Pandora, any apps that are available on Android, just keep in mind that podcast apps should not cost you money. So my links will take you to a number of apps that are free and work great. Otherwise, you can listen pretty much anywhere you get audio. If you're listening in an app now, please like, follow, subscribe, whatever your app allows you to do, and you will get 3 new episodes of the Juicebox Podcast every week to choose from. You can listen to them all, listen to some of them, whatever works best for you. If you're looking for people chatting about management, you should look no farther than the Facebook page for the Juicebox Podcast. It's called Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. It's a private group, so you can talk freely. Go find that if you're looking for 10,000 users now. It's a really terrific place to talk about using insulin and all the things that come up when you have type 1. I'm also on Instagram. I don't do much on Twitter, but it's there at Juicebox Podcast. And let me just say thank you one more time. It's the end of March 2021. This month did 120% better than March of 2015. This was the most downloaded month in the history of the podcast. In fact, it had 15.38% more downloads than the previous month, February 2021. So let me thank you again for sharing the show, for subscribing in a podcast app, and for generally just being the most supportive group of people I could ever hope for. I'll talk to you soon. I'll actually be back in like 2 days with another episode. So hold tight. There's more coming.